Dr. Edward Hargrove was a man of science, a historian with an unshakable faith in logic and reason. For him, the mysteries of the world were simply puzzles waiting to be solved, artifacts to be catalogued, inscriptions to be translated, and myths to be debunked. It was this insatiable curiosity that brought him to the windswept cliffs of Ashcombe, an isolated seaside town known for its crumbling medieval ruins and endless expanse of gray, restless sea. Edward had come to Ashcombe to escape the noise of the city and finish his research in peace. His task was simple: document the remnants of a forgotten monastery said to have been abandoned in the 14th century. The locals spoke of the ruins in hushed tones, muttering about strange occurrences and an ancient curse. But Edward dismissed these tales as nothing more than folklore, the fanciful imaginings of a superstitious town. One cold, blustery morning, Edward set out for the ruins. Perched on a cliff overlooking the sea, the monastery was a skeleton of its former self, a scattering of moss-covered stones and a single jagged archway that seemed to frame the endless horizon. As Edward sifted through the rubble, his gloved hand brushed against something hard and smooth. Curious, he knelt and unearthed a small whistle, carved from bone and yellowed with age. The whistle was simple but elegant, with intricate patterns etched along its surface. On one side, he noticed an inscription in Latin: Quis estiste qui venit? Who is this who is coming? Edward felt a faint shiver run down his spine, but he quickly shrugged it off. It was just an artifact, he told himself. A relic of the past. That evening, back in his rented cottage, Edward studied the whistle under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The craftsmanship was remarkable, and the inscription intrigued him. He wondered if the monks had used the whistle in some kind of ritual. Perhaps it was ceremonial, a call to prayer or a signal to the brethren. Unable to resist his curiosity, Edward raised the whistle to his lips and blew. The sound was low and hollow, almost like the distant moan of the sea. It sent a faint vibration through the air, carrying an odd resonance that seemed to linger long after the note had faded. Satisfied, Edward placed the whistle on his desk and retired for the night. But as he drifted off to sleep, a strange unease settled over him. The whistle's sound seemed to echo in his mind, weaving through his dreams like a thread of shadow. In his dream, Edward stood on the cliffs of Ashcombe, the wind howling around him. The sky was dark, and the sea churned violently below. He felt a presence behind him, something vast and ancient, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He turned, but there was nothing there. Only the wind, whispering his name. When Edward awoke, the room was eerily quiet. The usual creaks and groans of the old cottage were absent, and the air felt unnaturally still. He glanced toward his desk, and his heart skipped a beat. The whistle was gone. At first he thought he must have misplaced it, but as he searched the room, a growing sense of dread crept over him. The whistle wasn't just missing, it had vanished. And then he noticed something else: faint, wet footprints trailing across the wooden floor, leading from the desk to the door. The prints were large, too large to be human, with long, claw-like impressions at the tips. Edward tried to rationalize what he was seeing. Perhaps it was a prank, he thought, or maybe he had tracked in mud earlier without realizing it. But deep down, he knew neither explanation made sense. Something was wrong. The following day, Edward threw himself into his work, determined to push the events of the previous night from his mind. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. Everywhere he went, he felt as though he was being watched. The wind seemed to carry faint whispers, just beyond the edge of hearing. And on more than one occasion, he caught glimpses of a figure in the distance, tall, gaunt, and shrouded in shadow. Each time he blinked, it was gone. That night, Edward locked the doors and windows of the cottage, desperate for a sense of security. But as he lay in bed, the whispers grew louder. They rose and fell like the tide, a haunting rhythm that seemed to echo the whistle's low, mournful note. And then he heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the house. Edward froze, his breath catching in his throat. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside his bedroom door. The door creaked open, and Edward's blood ran cold. At first he saw nothing, only darkness. But then the shadows began to shift, coalescing into a form. It was tall and emaciated, its limbs unnaturally long and its face obscured by a swirling void of darkness. The figure moved toward him, its presence suffocating, its clawed hands reaching out. Edward scrambled backward, his rational mind collapsing under the weight of terror. He had summoned this thing, this presence, with the whistle. And now it had come for him. In a blind panic, Edward grabbed a lamp from his bedside table and hurled it at the figure. The light shattered against the wall, and for a brief moment, the room was illuminated. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like smoke in the wind. Seizing the opportunity, Edward bolted from the room and fled into the night. He ran to the cliffs, the wind howling around him, and hurled the whistle into the sea with all his strength. The artifact disappeared into the waves, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly the whispers faded, and the oppressive presence lifted. Edward returned to his cottage shaken but alive. He never spoke of what happened in Ashcombe, nor did he allow himself to dwell on the events of that terrible night. But he carried the memory with him, a gnawing reminder of the dangers of curiosity and the price of disturbing what should remain undisturbed. And though he never saw the figure again, he sometimes thought he heard it in the dead of night when the wind whispered through the trees, "Who is this who is coming?"